So in a previous video we looked at systematic sampling, and then now we look at cluster sampling. Okay, so cluster sampling. So here what we do is that, trying to explain, what we do is that there is this population, okay, but geographically there are some differences. Okay, so it happens that we have these people there, they are different from these people, and then these guys are different. So 1 2 3 4. Okay, so my population, which is this, because naturally there's this kind of differences. Before I do that, I have to be able to demarcate and find the various divisions. Okay, right. So if the members of a population are physically separated from one another, okay, and simple random sampling procedure is impractical, we may use cluster sampling. Okay, so remember that simple random sampling you have a lot of cost. There's going to be serious cost to incur if it happens that the people are widely separated. Okay, there's going to be some kind of serious cost that you are going to incur. Okay, so you wouldn't want to incur that cost if there is an alternative, if the people are widely scattered. So remember that we are saying that naturally or physically they are separated. So even though this is a population, but you saw that there are some divisions in the population. So let us say you went to a community, and then when you went to a community, you saw that the poor people are staying somewhere, the rich people are staying, so the medium people are staying somewhere, and then that. So you want to look at the salary distribution in the population. Okay, probably you wouldn't want to use simple random sampling. Okay, already the population is separated, so you might want to pick some. All right, so we say cluster sampling refers to the procedure of dividing the population into groups called clusters. So you went there, this is the population, then you try to divide them into groups. So 1 2 3 4 groups, and drawing a sample of clusters to represent the population. So in here, our sampling units are the clusters. Okay, what we are going to sample is the clusters. So now here we don't go into this, that is another part, we'll talk about that later. So when you are doing cluster sampling, you divide them into groups, and then out of the 4 clusters you select some. So out of the 4 clusters I can select, let's say 2. Okay, I can select cluster 2 and cluster 4, and then this will be my sampling my sample. So all the elements in cluster 2 will be part, all the elements in cluster 4 will be part, and then I'll call this as my sample. Okay, that's a typical cluster sampling. So unlike systematic stratified sampling, where you divide them into stratas, and then you go here and pick a sample, go there, pick a sample, go there, pick a sample, go there, pick a sample. It is not done this way. In cluster sampling, what we do is that, okay, now that I've divided into clusters, I have to pick some of the clusters as my sample. So I pick 2 and 4 as my sample. So all the elements here, all the elements there are part of the sample. Okay, so but when you go into higher, this will be called one stage. This will be called one stage. Okay, one stage. This will be called one stage cluster sampling. Okay, one stage cluster sampling. So it will become double stage or 2-stage cluster sampling when if I select this as my cluster, I select these 2 clusters, the selected clusters, I go into them and pick another sample. So in this case I selected 2 and 4, so I go into 2 use simple random sampling or systematic sampling and pick a sample from here. Okay, and then I go into this and then also pick a sample, and then that, and then I combine them to give me my sample for my survey. That will become a two-stage cluster sampling. Okay, right. So cluster sampling are also referred to as area sampling. Okay, so remember that I said that most appropriately cluster samplings happens because of there is that geographic subdivisions. So already when there is that geographic subdivisions, naturally they are divided, so you want to do a cluster sampling. Okay, all right. So these are the advantages. Cluster sampling is less expensive since usually the items in the group are geographically close to each other. Okay, so what happened here is that let me try to explain what this one means. So assuming that there is a population, and then this is 1, 2, let's say 3, let me do that, 4. So these are the various subdivisions. Okay, so when you are using simple random sampling, it means when you combine them and pick a sample. So it happened that maybe somebody was here, somebody is here, somebody there, somebody here, some people are here. So you have to, if you want to collect the data, you have to go here, pick their sample, travel long distance, come here, pick a sample, take the data, come here, take the data, come here, take a data. That is going to be very expensive. Your resources might not be enough. Okay, geographically they are separated. So what systematic cluster sampling will do is that, okay, now that I have this division, I don't have to use simple random sampling. Let me select this and that as my sample. Okay, so if I want to collect my data, I just go here, I stay here, make sure I collect, because these people are close to each other. I might not incur a lot of cost by traveling to this place. Okay, there won't be that high cost for traveling to this, because I'm staying here. I'll collect everybody here, then when I finish I'll move here and then collect everybody here, so everybody is close. So I might not be incurring lots of costs as compared to using simple random sampling. Okay, so that is the advantage. So the clusters selected for a sample are together representative of the population. So the clusters that are selected look like the population. Okay, so disadvantage: cluster sampling is not recommended if the clusters are not homogeneous. So remember, I gave an example, if you can recall. Example that I gave, I said that assuming you went to a community, and then the community is separated by wealth. So the rich people are here, and then the poor people are here, poor, and then the moderate people are here, and all these people form the population. Okay, and then when you went there, because you saw there is this natural division, you wanted to use cluster sampling. Remember, assuming cluster sampling, you want to check the average salary and set up a business, and then you picked, as you will use a simple random sample, you pick this guy and this guy, and then you find out that the average salary is, let's say, 2 cedis. Meanwhile, these people are earning a lot of money. So you see this population, this cluster is different from this cluster. So there is that heterogeneity. It's heterogeneous. Okay, it's heterogeneous because this is different from this. There is diversity. So if the clusters are not homogeneous, if this cluster, it doesn't look like the same as this cluster, and it's not the same as this cluster, then cluster sampling cannot be done. Okay, then cluster sampling cannot be done. Okay, so assuming that the same community, you have mixture of rich, poor, and then medium in here, rich, poor, and medium in here, rich, poor, and medium in here. So you can talk about this as this cluster is the same as this, the same as that, not in terms of size, but the characteristics of people living here are the same as that and that. So these are what? Homogeneous. In that case, you can go ahead and select any of these clusters for your sample. So cluster sampling is not appropriate when it happens that your clusters are not what? Homogeneous. Take note. And then the number of sampling units in each cluster are not the same. So it is also not very appropriate if it happens that the number of sampling units in each clusters are not the same. So if it happens that this size is different from this size and this size is different from this size, it's not very appropriate. Okay, it's not recommended, because yeah, this people do, okay, they do, but it is more advanced. The calculations are I remember if you do cluster sampling, you would be taught that. Okay, all right. So that is that for cluster sampling.